Okay, so now we're going to get to Act 2 of Othello, and we're going to be doing a quick, brief textual analysis once again of the second act. This should supplement, of course, on the side of your reading and also watching the online version of the Shakespearean play, Othello. So the opening scene in Act 2 really has a function of developing the setting. There's a lot of different things that are happening in it. But the first thing that you need to know is that, of course, there were no huge props during Shakespeare's time. So any sort of development of setting had to be done through dialogue. And that's what we see in Montano's discussion um, with the two men at the beginning here when he talks about how big the flood is, how the tempest is just everywhere, and there's a storm surge, and that there's been this massive storm. And we learn that Desdemona, Cassio, Iago, Othello, all of them that are coming to Cyprus have been caught inside of this storm. So the imagery is trying to give us a sense of character representation as well, because what's happening is Iago is also brewing up a storm here in this act. It gives us a sense of foreshadowing, and it gives us a sense of metaphorical imagery to recognize what Iago does throughout Act Two. And so that's what we see here at the beginning of this scene, as we see people arriving to get safely from the storm. Um, so as we see, there's a lot of talks about the Turks, and it's soon discovered that the Turks, of course, their ships have gone down with the storm. During this time period, this is just a historical thing. It's not that Shakespeare had any sort of negative feelings toward Turks. I mean, he might have if he had cared a lot about the political avenues of Italy. But between Italy and the Turks, which is modern day Turkey, they warred over several of the islands, especially the sea there, and then also just other land. This was happening consistently for over 100 years in the medieval time period. So Cyprus itself is known as a very beautiful island, but it also has a real reputation for being an island that really serves as a good fortress to the oncoming land of Italy. So Cyprus is a place where a lot of the battles are going to be fought during that time period. Now, though, it's pretty much just considered a beautiful destination to go to. There's another picture of Cyprus. So uh, the once, like I just said just a second ago, the image of the storms is really there to contrast and or to compare to that of the nature of Iago, who at the same time as these brewing storms is also consistently logic and rational. So that's also happening, as I have already said. Now, we have this interesting back and forth between Iago, Cassio, and Desdemona, and Emilia too. Emilia being Iago's wife. Um, Remember that at the end of Act One, there was just this sort of scenario where Iago sort of thinks that maybe Othello has slept with his wife. And we'll talk about that more later. I don't think it really matters whether or not it's true. I don't think it's true, but I don't think it matters whether or not it is. I think it's something that Iago has to tell himself in order to um, use whatever he wants to do to manipulate other people. Also, a sense of foreshadowing, that he is willing to use whoever he wants to serve his own purposes, including his wife, Amelia. And here it sort of sets up just the nature of how he views Amelia, which is Amelia is going to be, of course, a microcosm to his views on women as it is. And so he talks to Cassio. He says, "Hey, it's really nice of you to be sweet to her, but if she gave you as much back talk as she gives me, you would probably have enough of it." He's playing on the idea of how Cassio gives her a kiss, and there's that sense there. And Desdemona kind of, we see a real goodness to her. She sort of sticks up and gives him a really like negative time. She gives Iago a hard time about how he's doing. So she's almost this sort of um proto-feminist in a way. I'm sure many people have written on that. I have not read a ton, but there could be a case there just out of this scene alone. However, I don't know if that could be a strong case for the entirety of the play. But this quip that Iago makes really begins this whole series of what he would consider, he calls praises, and they're absolutely not. They're debasing negative things that are being said about women, and he's basically using locker room humor here in front of Desdemona, Amelia, his wife, and then she's the object of that, and Cassio as well. He also once again equates women to pretty much a lot of sex jokes, and that once again tells you his view of love, sex, and women. So Iago really is sort of a distorted, evil character, and we continue to see that develop in this scene. What's interesting here is after this ironic wordplay, Iago notices that Cassio greets Desdemona and kind of takes her by the palm, kisses her, and he does it in this very gallant way. Now, Iago takes this to suggest an evil motive later and try to convince Rodrigo that Cassio and Desdemona have a secret. After Rodrigo leaves, then Iago has this comment about, with as little web as this, I will ensnare great flies. Cassio, suggesting this imagery of a spider weaving to web a trap for its victim. And like the spider, Iago's weaving a web of deceit to capture Cassio in a bad place. So not only does he dislike Othello, he also really hates Cassio. And then also in this aside, he remarks, you are well tuned now, but I'll set down pegs that make this music, honest as I am. So once again, he's using music imagery, and Iago's using imagery all throughout. It's part of what he does. Is he never says things directly. I mean, he does, but there's also this sort of layer of manipulation and how he takes something and twists it. And he does that with a lot of imagery, dialogue throughout the play. Now, this music imagery suggested by his comment is that Desdemona and Othello are instruments to be played. So he is the player and he is playing the instruments. They are being manipulated. He treats himself sort of as the chess player, and everybody else is his pawn throughout this play. Now, again, Iago, by doing this, takes something pure and beautiful like music and debases it. We see him do that with food, sex, women, and music already so far in the play. So at the end of this scene, we have another Iago soliloquy. There are 3 by Othello and 8 by Iago within this play, which of course makes Iago the primary character. Othello is our protagonist and our tragic hero, but Iago really is sort of the instrument or catalyst of all the things that happen in the play. He's our primary character. So in this soliloquy, we are going to see once again how Iago looks and views love and his sort of perverted look at love. He reveals the motivation, which is why he's going to execute his plan. And he takes inventory of everything that he just observed in all of the play up until now. And he believes that Cassio actually loves Desdemona and that Desdemona loves him. It's true, but their love is not adulterous. It's a genuine cordiality for one another. And this is really interesting. I think that we can think about this in the modern way. Most languages have, several words for love. English is one of those that doesn't. That doesn't have a lot of words for love, and I think that might be a good parallel for us to understand. If you take Greek, for example, Greek has 4 words for love: agape, charis, eros, and philos. Agape is an unconditional, unrestrained love. Eros is erotic love, Philos is brotherly love, and Charis is charitable love, that you give to other people that are there, that sort of grace or charity that you can have. So there's all these different forms of love, and in America we don't have that. A lot of times we equate love straight away to that sort of erotic, carnal, sexual love, and as if there's not this other way to love people. So we don't have a good language for that. And Iago really sort of exemplifies this same sort of characteristic. He does believe that Cassio loves Desdemona, and he's right. But the irony about this is that it's not the type of love that he thinks, because he's incapable of thinking about that type of love. Eventually, Iago also will cast dubious motives on this affection, and he does this in order to make Othello jealous, and to think about Othello and manipulate his Othello's constant loving noble nature as well. And so he uses love against love, or his manipulation of love, to do that. And then at the end of the soliloquy, he even goes so far as to say that he loves Desdemona, not out of lust, but merely as the means to feed his own plan of revenge. And so once again, you see that manipulation of love coming out of Iago's ideas. In scene 2, it's a really super quick scene. There's just this big celebration that Othello's going to have for victory over the Turkish fleet, even though they didn't really even fight. There was just, boom, a storm, and they just got rid of it, and they're gone. And so it also is there to celebrate Othello's marriage to Desdemona, but it's also serving as an ironic backdrop for Iago's treachery, which is going to be acted out on the streets of Cyprus, as Iago sets up his trap to discredit Cassio and Montano and Othello. So, there's this sort of back and forth, but the celebration inside and the deceit going on outside, and it sets up this real interesting sense of dramatic irony for the reader through the setting, which is a pretty genius idea with such a quick scene to have happen. So scene 3 is sort of a big deal. You have this basically what happens in the scene is Iago once again manipulates and deceives Cassio, gets him drunk. Cassio gets in a fight, gets stripped of his lieutenancy by Othello, and then Iago then is like, hey, you need to figure out a way to get back into Othello's good graces. You should probably do that through Desdemona. So he's therefore dealing and weaving the trap even more. And that's what's happening. So let's look at this scene just a little bit. So they have this conversation about Desdemona, and Iago suggests that Cassio should have a drink to the health of Othello. It's a time for celebration. And Cassio sets up the scene by suggesting, hey, he really can't drink, because whenever he drinks, he cannot handle his drink. He's not good. He's a lightweight. And yet Iago continues to encourage him. So Cassio assents and drinks, and then they continue to drink. And then he has this conversation with Montano, and that conversation with Montano is simply, hey, he's a great lieutenant, but he just drinks all the time. And Montano's like, oh, why would Othello put him in there to be that's that in that place if he's that? I guess he's a really good lieutenant. But then Iago sort of stints Rodrigo, and Rodrigo comes in and gets Cassio all going, and Cassio starts a fight. And so at that point, Othello is called, and he strips Cassio of his lieutenancy. So then once Othello leaves, Cassio's sad, he's really upset, and he's at a loss for his reputation, which has just been destroyed. And to be honest, I mean, it's a pretty extreme punishment that he gets right away from Othello, and maybe that shows that there is a little bit more issue to what Othello is doing in this process. Like maybe he's making a bad decision there as well. It's a quick impulsive action that he's taking towards Cassio. But either way, Iago then uses this opportunity to say, hey, Cassio, you know who has the ear of Othello? Desdemona. And she and you are friends, so you need to go talk to her. You need to go talk to her, and you need to repair this. You need to get your lieutenancy back. Let me help you. And um, and at that point, Cassio agrees and leaves, and Iago once again talks, and he talks about how he's going to go then talk to Othello and pour poison in Othello's ear, which was a typical way of killing somebody at the time, is pouring poison into the ear. And that's obviously an allusion to Hamlet, in which you have the murder of what is it's the murder of Gonzago, the murder of Gonzago. And that's the way that Hamlet, of course, discovers how his uncle killed his father. So there's obviously that allusion there right at the end of Act Two. So that's really the basic of Act Two. It's a pretty quick act. It gets us in action. There's a lot of movement going on, quick celebration. But what we see is primarily the deepening of Iago's evil, plus the web that he's sort of creating to ensnare everybody. So it's really getting ready for the big action of the play in Act 3.